There's a fairly well-known saying about Jaguars that you never actually get to own them, that the factory always maintains an interest in the car to the extent that for about half of their lives they need to go back to the factory workshops. Now that might be a bit unfair, but it's not totally unrealistic about the reasonably modern crop of Jaguars that have come from the British Leyland stable. It is a pity because, in truth, the Jaguar originated in a factory system which insisted on a very high degree of quality indeed, and it's only since British Leyland have taken over Jaguar that that quality seems to have dropped at all. And even now it is only to the extent that a number of rather foolish and petty things go wrong, and that's an enormous pity because in reality this, the XJ6 Mark III, is a beautiful, silky, lovely, desirable, marvellous personal touring car. Despite all that praise, there are a few little criticisms, and perhaps we might begin with comfort. And that might seem like a strange thing because you would have to imagine that the Jaguar was very comfortable, and in truth it is. But for some strange reason, these seats provide very little support under the back of your thighs, and I would have thought that a little more length in the seat itself might have improved that. And what's more, the seats are a bit stiff. Maybe it has to do with the lack of suppleness in the new leather, but you feel as if you're sitting upon them rather than in them. And I think that sort of comfort could be improved in a car with this prestige quality about it. The engine now is a pretty old design. It was first released in the years immediately following the Second World War. It's grown since in size and it's been refined, but it remains a very good six-cylinder twin overhead camshaft engine with more than adequate amounts of power and certainly a great deal of smoothness, all of which is transmitted through, in this case, a 3-speed automatic transmission, also quite effective, but I would have preferred perhaps a 4-speed transmission as Daimler-Benz provide for Mercedes. And above even both of those automatic transmissions, I would have preferred a manual. And there is a manual version of the Jaguar, but we in Australia are not privileged enough to be able to use that. In other words, you can't buy it out here, which is a great pity. The steering of the car is good. I'll relate that to handling a bit later on, but at the moment, let's just think about it in terms of its town operation. Because it is power steering, it's very light, but I suggest it might be just slightly over-boosted. There's not much feel in it, and it's very light, too light, I think, really. There's no reason for a steering wheel to be so easy to manipulate that you can go from one full lock to the other while you're standing still, and you can certainly do that with this. So maybe a little more feel in the steering. They're not very many criticisms. They are significant, I think, though. Let's take it out of the town and onto the country roads and see how it performs out there. If the XJ6 is a good city car, it's an even better country road car. It really is quite beautiful. Quiet, sure-footed, a confident motor car that feels right wherever it is. Jaguar's advertising slogan of grace, space and pace becomes quite clearly evident out here on roads just like this one. Handling's good, so it ought to be. Long wheelbase, wide track, good fat tyres, grabbing each corner of the car and sitting them fairly and squarely on the road. And the brakes, superb. All discs on all four wheels. Situation like this with long steep descents and lots of corners, and you can work them hard without any apparent fade, and they are definitely pulling the car back in just as you would like them to do. Okay, all the lovely stuff about Jaguar is important, but there are some problems too. Question of philosophy, I suppose, but this Jaguar uses in the vicinity of 13
miles per gallon, 21 litres per 100 kilometres. And that's a lot of fuel. I guess if you could afford the $40,000 you're going to have to pay to buy it, it won't bother you too much. But it's just possible that that's not really the point. We are all being asked to conserve fuel, and that request is certainly justifiable in the short term at least. Thus, I suppose we have to ask whether cars which produce such low economy figures are morally right for the 80s. It's not for me to say, I just pose the question. And now, for a giant step from the sublime to the ridiculous, this is the Suzuki hatch. Despite appearances, this and the XJ6 Jaguar have one common feature. They are both personal transport systems, a set of wheels, as the kids would so eloquently describe it. The fact that one costs $40,000 and the other $4,000 is simply a degree of built-in luxury. There is no moral question about a car like this. It is cheap to buy and very inexpensive to run, and it may well be the best set of wheels for the kids currently available on the market. Let's take a look at it. It has only 2 seats, which seems to be enough for most of the young people of today. And it's a van, which also seems to be very popular today. In this case, these little panels remove and glass will go in there, which is probably an attractive and important feature, especially from the all-round visibility point of view. It's a hatchback, which is today's kind of motor vehicle. And it's one with a difference, and a bit of a strange difference. It is possible to take that panel of metal out there, it's separate from this one, to put a seat in there and make it a 4-seater. Strangely enough, the Suzuki distributors in Australia don't recommend that you do it, and neither do I, because there wouldn't be a lot of room in there and I wouldn't think it was very safe, and for the life of me I can't find any seatbelt mounting points which would also make it illegal. So it stays essentially a commercial pleasure vehicle. I suppose it's a bit unfortunate for the Suzuki that we happen to start this test on a country road, and even more unfortunate that I should have elected to start it on a long uphill drag, because it immediately puts this little car at a distinct disadvantage. Without a doubt, this is not its home territory. It seems to me that it might be well suited to the city, and we'll find that out later, but as at this moment, it's fairly slow. Obviously, fairly slow. It would take it quite a long time to go anywhere if there happened to be some mountains involved. But it's not too bad on the flat. It does motor along quite reasonably at about the 90 to 100k mark. It's just that, in reality, it's not the sort of thing that you'd probably want to take on long country trips anywhere. Not to say it wouldn't get you there, it would. But it would have to do so in a most leisurely fashion, simply meaning, I suppose, that you should, if you own one of these, allow yourself a little more time to do the trip and go ahead with the plan to do it in a leisurely fashion. And as a result, I'll bet you would also do it very economically. There are some things we need to know about the Suzuki that we'll have to do off the road. So we might head for our stress test circuit and see how we go there. There's not really much point in trying any high-speed cornering, stress cornering if you like, in a car which has a maximum speed of around 100 k's, but you'd very rarely be up there. But what we really do need to know is something about its performance under some potential stress conditions. And some of the early, very small Japanese cars were a bit suspect in this area, so it's even more important on that basis. What we'll do is we'll run it through the swerve and recover exercise and jump on the brakes a couple of times. And if it responds reasonably well to those two extreme stress tests, then I would suggest there's probably no problem. So let's go and try that. It could be better, I can tell you. There's no question about that. It certainly isn't bad, but there are a lot of better handling, better brake motor cars around. And I think it's very significant that it is fitted with a set of commercial-style cross-ply tyres, which I wouldn't use under any circumstances in a car like this. It deserves something better, and therefore any self-respecting Australian driver would immediately fit this little Suzuki with a set of good quality steel-belted radials, and I'm certain that would make a considerable difference. As it stands at the moment, it's just that the tyres let go too early, that's all. For every demerit point that the little Suzuki hatch gets in the country, it gains one back in the city. It really is an eminently suitable little vehicle for city operation. And I mean, even as a personal car, if you could consider the fact of it being essentially a commercial vehicle. Obviously, it is absolutely superb for use by couriers and by people who have small delivery runs, even small businesses. But it's not a bad little personal car either. Transmission, which you start to use quite extensively in town, is excellent. It's light, quick, accurate, not much movement in the shift lever, and the ratios are well selected to be matched to a really tiny engine. One of the remarkable things about it is the amount of space on the interior, which is excellent, and it is in fact much more comfortable and much more spacious than almost any other small car that I've ever driven, and way ahead of anything that came out in the early 60s and 70s, which is when the small car boom was on. Its most interesting feature, without a doubt, is its engine. The capacity of this engine is 543 cc's, just over half a litre. It really is very small. And yet, it already meets the requirements of Stage 3 of Australian Design Rule 27A. It provides entirely adequate performance. It is, in truth, quite brisk. And at the same time, it manages to produce economy figures of around 6 litres per 100 kilometres, or 47 miles per gallon in town. And it's already proven to give over 60 miles per gallon on country trips. It's really difficult to do much better than that in an engine which also just happens not to pollute. Thus, it can be done. And if Suzuki can do it, even with a tiny engine, then other people can clearly do it with something bigger than that. The combination of economy, performance, and a non-polluting engine, to me at least, gives this little vehicle a great deal of appeal. I just brought up the subject of Design Rule 27A. Sydney really is a very beautiful city with a major problem. There are two ways of overcoming the pollutants in cities. One of them is with Australian Design Rule 27A, and the other, quite obviously, is to remove private cars from city areas altogether, and not just Sydney. And another development of that idea is to change our current system of public transport. Some 4 years ago on Talk, we asked the question, why not electric buses in inner city areas? And in fact, we used this very bus to examine that possibility. 4 years is a long time for decisions like that to be made and taken, and yet we still don't have an answer to the question, why not electric buses for city areas? The people who built this bus have been asking the same question and still getting no realistic answers. Let's take a ride in it and see if we can find out what the objections might be.
In terms of its general performance, this bus suffers very little in comparison with the buses we use now. Its major limitations are power and range, so consider that their intention would be to use an electric bus system only in the central business districts, where range and power are not a problem. And we have the advantage of quietness and smoothness over existing diesel buses, which makes it not only more pleasant for the passengers, but also for the drivers. The power range problems continue to stem from inadequate storage battery systems. In this bus, it is proposed that the batteries are replaced on a changeover system which takes not more than a few minutes, so that there is no downtime problem with recharging.
Bear in mind a bus is more than just coachwork and seats, which is what you can see. It is, in fact, its mechanicals, the most important component at all as far as we're concerned, and particularly with regard to the conservation of resources and lack of pollution. And that's where this bus begins and ends, as far as I'm concerned. In terms of its general comfort, it's just as good as any other bus. There is no apparent reason why it should not be entirely successful. It seems to me to be very practical. Now, let's see what the City Council has to say about it.
The spokesman for the Council of the City of Sydney is the Lord Mayor, Alderman Nelson Mears. I asked him what the Council's attitude is to electric buses in the Sydney business area.
We're most anxious, and we've made a commitment to the introduction to electric buses in the City of Sydney as soon as possible. We believe that that technology is already available. I have ridden in a prototype bus which has been designed by Mr. Limbragen, which we know will be able to negotiate the grades of the city, and we recommend that it be introduced by the Public Transport Commission as soon as possible.
Do you know what the current attitude is of the Public Transport Commission?
No, I don't. There is no attitude so far as we're concerned. There has been no response. There is a need for an expenditure of a large amount of money, because if we are going to have a city where the private vehicle is not to enter to improve the environment and eliminate pollution, then we must have a system of buses which is so convenient that nobody is disadvantaged by not being able to drive their car into the city.
The Public Transport Commission gave us a similar no-comment response, but directed us to the New South Wales Minister for Transport, Mr. Peter Cox. There is a bus which was presented to the New South Wales and other state governments recently for evaluation. What was the Public Transport Commission's reaction to that?
Well, I've travelled on the bus. There was a demonstration of the bus in the city here. It's been technically examined by the people in the department. Some of the deficiencies that were discovered were brakes, for example, axle systems, suspension and steering, and also the step into the bus we felt was too high because of problems that we have with elderly people. And basically the bus is a demonstration bus. I did write to the Transport Minister in Western Australia and the Transport Minister in South Australia suggesting that we join together in a research of this particular bus, but both those governments were not prepared to go ahead with that.
Assuming that the difficulties are because this is a prototype unit, what are the chances of getting financial assistance to develop a second developmental bus?
What you're suggesting to me is that the state government should make a financial commitment of about $2 million for a bus that's not proven at the moment. Now, I've also got the taxpayers of this state to consider, and what you're suggesting to me is that I should go to Cabinet and make that financial commitment. Having gone to Cabinet, I doubt very much whether Cabinet would approve of it. What I think has got to happen is I think private enterprise has got to play a role in this area, and that they've got to come up and look at new technology, because after all, that's what private enterprise, whenever I talk to them, is that they're always telling me that they're the ones that have got the new ideas and that they get things moving, but I haven't seen them doing too much in this area. And
supposing that there is a place in our future for electric buses, how far away might that be?
Well, battery improvement will, I think, bring a great advance to electric buses, because as you know, that if we had electric buses running around the city, we'd have to have battery charging units established throughout the city. That some of our government buses travel long distances, and these electric buses, or this particular one, carries 2 tonnes of batteries. So that if you've got to renew the batteries, you've got to have a vehicle that comes down. It's got to be, the batteries have got to be lifted out, new batteries put in. I'm not knocking electric vehicles. I think they're the coming thing, and I think that we've got to look at this technique. But what I'm saying is that that the big advance that's going to occur is the British investigation into the new type of battery, which will give a longer life as far as peak hour is concerned.
Minister, we've been waiting 20 or 30 years for a breakthrough with batteries. Assuming that breakthrough doesn't come, but that we can change batteries for short distance travel in the new style buses which are already possible, are we likely to see developments along those lines?
Well, I'm establishing a committee in which Mr Hills will be on it, and planning and environment, and the Public Transport Commission, to have a look at all of these aspects. But I think in relation to electric buses, that I think the federal government's got a role to play too. I don't think everything can be sort of left to state governments to finance all the transport needs.
With city pollution levels as high as they are, the Australian taxpayer is being asked to pay the price of Design Rule 27A and increase fuel consumption. Surely electric buses, which will help to remove those cars from city areas, must have a high priority.
Well, look, I'm prepared to talk to anyone that's got ideas. I'm prepared to talk to Mr Limbruggen. I'm even prepared that if he puts a proposal up to submit it to the federal body, which is the ATAC, which is a meeting of all transport ministers, state and federal. Now, I'm prepared to do that for him, so that he'll at least get the bus considered by all state transport ministers and the federal minister. And I'm prepared to do that for him if he does a proper documentation and submits it to me or comes in and sees me.
That $2 million the Minister quoted is the price that's been stated for 10 buses, not one. To do a second stage development on the Roy Limbruggen prototype bus would cost substantially less than that. And as for private enterprise making some sort of contribution, I would have thought they'd already done that. And at this stage, they need some sort of realistic encouragement. If there's to be substantial change in these areas, it seems to me that governments must be both proponents and sponsors of that change.
Just because you can't always see the pollution doesn't mean that it isn't there. It's really dreadful in Sydney, it's bad in Melbourne, and it's developing in all the other cities in Australia as well. The concept of removing private transport from inner city areas goes hand in hand with
not only pollution and conservation of the environment and conservation of resources like petrol, but with a number of other things as well. Bear in mind that the general principle of building vehicles like Roy Leenbruggen's bus leads us to a state where there's no question that the bigger the vehicle is, the easier it is to make insofar as the use of electrics. It's simply an economies of size basis, meaning that having decided that we can have at least the possibility of electric public transport systems, then we can also have the possibility of electric vans, delivery vans, trucks, things of that nature, and probably both of those before there is any likelihood of us ever having small private electric vehicles. Not that they're out of question, on the contrary, they're available as well. This is an electric van, a Bedford, current model, part of an experimental division unit of Flinders University in South Australia, which has been operating since 1973. It is, in fact, highly efficient. It is so simple to drive, and yet it does the job extremely well, and there's been a substantial amount of proof of that. The Flinders University project started out with private vehicles, however, and then subsequently went across to the concept of building a van like this one. And even now, that project, which has developed in the last 7 years, arguably the highest degree of technology available in the world for electric vehicles, period, is struggling for money. This is 1980. This is the period where people, and governments particularly, ought to be injecting huge amounts of funds into research projects which give us an alternative, and Flinders University project is struggling for money to the extent that the private car development project is not going ahead right at this moment. I find that inconceivable. It makes me angry, and it should make you angry. And if we all get angry enough, something could be done about it. Good night. See you next week.
Peter Wherrett will be back with Talk in 2 weeks. Next Wednesday, he moves aside along with the inventors to make way for our live coverage of the first one-day cricket international between England and Australia. Stay with ABC now for the premiere of the powerful new drama series, Spring and Fall.